HO Talk Show.
Who else would you bring in, when you want lively discussion, but you also want to get properly informed,
right?
Other than Sister Girls Eye on the Bride's Eye. Zyhana, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a little bit. Glad to have you back.
It has been.
Yeah. But we always appreciate how whenever you're available, you always oblige, to bless our airwaves with us. Once again, is UVA and Charlottesville has made national headlines, for something, that's not so savory. That being the protests happening right now on grounds at the University of Virginia. And then, so not only, do these times shed a light on the university, but also the city, because then you see what departments or what communities are also involved or represented. So have you at such times when we see law enforcement of different levels, when it gets escalated to the point to where they get called in. So first and foremost, you being a student, definitely want to say that I'm glad to, to see that you are safe and sound. And I wanted to kind of start it there from that perspective, the student's perspective. Like, what can you tell us about sort of the atmosphere, sort of the general mindset, the comfortability of the students right now?
I think a lot has happened in the past 24 hours, which if you were to ask me this probably 2 days ago, it'd be completely different. I think that student organizers have come to the understanding over the past few years, especially since 2017, that there is no real safe space for students who want to have brave conversations and, be a part of rather controversial discussions on grounds. So, there's kind of this illusion of safety, and kind of like quote Nakia Walker, like, there's this illusion that we're all kind of like being a part of and living under. But I think that students now understand that, like, I think the main question is, we've seen encampments all over the country for the past few weeks. And so UVA is not alone. But I think the question is, how can, after 2017, how can we have all of these conversations about freedom of speech and supporting student organizers and activists who are doing brave work? And, you go into the classroom and your professors dap you up, high five you, good work, congratulations. But then the administration does not protect you in situations where you touch the untouchable. And I think this conversation about Israel and Palestine is deemed as the untouchable. And it's cool to talk about anything, until you get into that. And I think that that's really telling. But after students were tear gassed yesterday, and allegedly I've heard that there were rubber bullets deployed, and I did see a lot of aggressive police officers. Some even were aggressive towards me. I think that there's a lot of concern, a lot of worry, and students were literally like taken into custody at, ACRJ. So there's, I mean, I don't think safety is I don't think anyone feels safe right now, but I definitely think that the university's swift response was very telling as far as how they chose to respond so quickly to that, when we've been asking them all week, what about divestment? What about, what's your response to the Palestinian crisis? And there was silence.
Now, let me ask though, let me interject there, and thank you for that synopsis, because again, it's number one, like, we all have experience with the college life and knows what it means, at bare minimum, to be away from family, or to feel that our family members or even ourselves are, are in a space that we're maybe away from family and friends, and that we're safe. Right. So I think that's of the utmost importance, and, should stay in as a focal point. But I did want to ask your clarification, and I hope this doesn't sound trivial, but this is something that I saw come up, and for the sake of our listeners, I wanted to mention it. I saw folks even arguing the details of, some folks said that they tried to show restraint even when people needed to disperse because they were illegally encamped, and they mentioned using pepper spray and not tear gas, because pepper spray is a milder form to try to disperse people. Any comment on that, whether like the validity of that, or if you think it makes a difference if it's pepper spray or
I think both are harmful. I mean, there's a reason why it's used to disperse people. And I think that either way you look at it, both are inappropriate for what the students were doing. So I'm not sure that those technicalities matter at this point, especially when I've witnessed for the past few days and also yesterday, students just holding a line, sitting peacefully, saying chants, asking, I don't see no riot here. Why are y'all in riot gear? It's a rhetorical question, but it's powerful because it's true. There was no riot going on. Students weren't setting anything on fire. It was like interesting because if y'all remember when we won the national championship, was it 2019? And how students like rushed the corner and took over. I mean, that was more violent than what was happening at this encampment. So I don't think that matters.
Gotcha. That's definitely.
What's your best assumption as to why that protest escalated to the point of tear gas or what have you being dispensed? Because you're certainly entitled to your right of a peaceful protest. And to my knowledge, that's what happened. So what was the reasoning behind that disbursement?
So I think it's really hard to know why law enforcement acts in the way that they do. What I've heard so far and what I think was like basically said in President Ryan's email is that the group has been fine and peaceful all week. But then when they put tents up, that's when they started getting warnings like, okay, y'all got to take these tents down. Y'all are cool to stay here as long as there are no tents up. And so I still am not sure how that makes it not peaceful, but I can understand that if that was like what our policy is, which I don't see how that's a policy because someone literally took pictures of the past 2 days of tents up at the tennis courts with students having like small, like personal tents and a like pop-up tent at the tennis courts.
Okay.
And a professor actually posted that this morning as well. So I think with that in mind, it's like the main question that students are asking is, how are we enforcing things? And that's kind of the nature of law enforcement too. It's kind of like if you get caught, if they see you do it, then you get in trouble for it. But people are doing it all over. And does that make it right? I mean, that's a question that we can debate about. But I do think that equal enforcement is important. And President Ryan said in his email something about like neutral enforcement of our policies. And it's not neutral. It's very politically charged.
Family, we are joined by none other than activist Bryant discussing the UVA protests. So Zai, let's sort of lay more of a foundation. I want to talk about the actual art, I'll call it, of protesting, right? Because I think that plays a part, because in most layered situations, right, in conversations, sometimes we get lost in the sauce, right? Because there may be a certain aspect that we get emotional about, and then we sort of lose focus of, of actual like validated truth, right, of what happens. So I bring that up because, all right, I'm going to kind of layer this, and you can answer it or interject where you want. So with a protest, and again, like from your expertise being an activist, so with the protest, there's reasons for going into a protest, right? And do people go into protests saying that, okay, there's a chance that we're going to get arrested, but as long as we prove our point, we're going to protest. And then you have the layer of, this is going to be a peaceful protest / lawful protest, unless you want to unpack those separately, to whereas we won't get arrested because we're following the rules. So I'm just trying to clarify, are we getting upset that there was a rule that said no tents, and so then when they wouldn't disperse, that was the grounds for calling in law enforcement? Like, can we be upset at that if there was warning given about that this is unlawful because of the rules?
So I think there are a couple of things here. You first asked, do people before going out to a protest kind of assess the risks of what is involved with that? And that is one thing that I've told so many students, even back when we were protesting the noose situation. I think that was 2022, that fall semester. Like, I was very clear, or maybe it was 2023. I'm sorry, the years are blending together. But I was very clear that like, when you go out to a protest, there are risks that come along with that. And you have to decide what's your green, yellow, red. What is your, like, this is where I draw the line for myself. I don't want to get arrested because of XYZ, or I'm willing to get arrested and I have privilege and I'm allowing myself to be on the front lines to serve as a buffer for those who do not have the same privilege. So it's kind of like a personal assessment that you have to take. But once you decide what your comfortability is, you act within that. And I think that it comes from a place of educating yourself around what that looks like. And I actually made a reel a couple days ago because there were so many encampment protests going up. And I was telling like students, like one, someone needs to know where you are at all times for safety accountability.
Mhm.
But number two, you need to know what the policies and what the laws and ordinances are of the space that you're going to protest in, so that
Right.
you can make the best decision for yourself before you go out and act. Don't go out there acting willy-nilly, because unfortunately nobody's going to be able to, help
Mhm,
you
mhm.
if you get into a situation that is crossing the line where you can't be helped. But some people are like, I feel strongly enough about this issue that I'm willing to do that.
Mhm.
And then when you started asking about the rules and the
Yeah.
technicalities of that, I think again, it just, there's so much to say. Like, I'm not sure that, again, even if they were putting up tents and it was against the rules, I'm not sure that we needed state police,
Mhm.
Albemarle County, UVA, and Charlottesville to all work in conjunction with each other to literally turn UVA into what looked like a police state. Like, when I tell you,
Mhm,
I was able
mhm.
to park my car somewhere, and then 30 minutes when I tried to go back that same route to get back to my car, I was told I couldn't go that way, and I needed to go all the way down to the other side of the lawn
Mhm.
to get to my vehicle. It was just like, everywhere I turned, there were police. They started blocking streets with Charlottesville Public Works trucks and all kinds of like police vehicles from Main
Mhm.
Street to the corner to the other side of grounds. And it was just like, everything happened so quickly. And
Mhm.
that's the part that is so astonishing to all of us, because we're just like, how did we get here?
Mhm.
Like, and I have a video that I'm going to post on social media later of Friday night. Everybody's out partying, vibing, semester just ended or classes just ended. And there's still this peaceful group of students. They had the tents at this point,
Mhm.
and they were just sitting there dancing, having joy, educating each other on what was going on. Each day they've had this thing called General Assembly, where they've literally asked community members and students to come and learn about what they're doing,
Mhm.
why they're doing it, and what the tactics will be for the day to hold space. So when I say it's peaceful, I don't just want to harp on the fact that it's peaceful. It's also well organized. And
Okay.
there's this political education component of it, where they are actually educating people on the conflict as well. So these encampments are not just people sitting out there just holding space. Like, no, there's actual like an educational element to it.
Yeah.
And that's the most important piece. And that's why it's so perfect that this is happening on a college campus, because that's what universities are all about. And I
Yeah.
would be remiss if I didn't say really quickly that we just saw how Louisa County decided for fiscal year 2025 that they're going to take funding away from PVCC because
Saw
a
that.
group called Students for Justice in Palestine showed a film and then had a discussion about it. And they were claiming that that was anti-Semitic, and they claimed that that was such extremism that they can no longer support PVCC with their funding. And it's just like, what are college campuses supposed to do? Are we not supposed to be fostering uncomfortable dialogue? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I was actually going to make a point about that. I'm glad you raised it, because isn't that the whole purpose of higher education institutions, is to help teach individuals how to think and to think for themselves. So that's almost a part of your liberty or what have you, liberty, authority, however you want to phrase it,
Mhm.
label it, to be able to participate in those type of things as an example, right?
Mhm.
Isn't it an example of the whole purpose that an institution exists? That
Mhm.
what we're teaching is working because our students are engaging in something like this, where they,
Mhm.
So
So I'm so glad that you said that, Miss Max, because that brings to light sort of the deeper issue, right?
Mhm.
Of why do people protest?
Before
because-
before we change thoughts,
Yeah.
though, I do
Well,
want to say,
yeah.
do we know how much of decision making President Ryan played in that situation as opposed to the police?
I would love
Mhm.
to know, actually. I'm
Mhm.
always interested in that question, mainly because we know that the university is actually controlled by the Board of Visitors. So when we think about how power is flowing and who's making the decisions, my first guess would be, just because I know how protests have worked in the past,
Mhm.
where UVA has collaborated with Charlottesville and Albemarle Police. I feel like it may have been Chief Longo
Mhm.
who decided, like, oh, let me lean on my partners here to come in and help. I'm not sure that President Ryan made that decision, just because I don't know if y'all have seen the email that he sent out to students and staff yesterday, the university community.
Yes, public,
It didn't seem as if he wanted that to happen that way, but he also didn't necessarily strongly condemn it either.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that President Ryan calls the shots in this situation. I really think that it was probably university police who made the decision to bring in the state police. And I actually talked to an Albemarle police officer. He had pulled up like right in front of me, and I was just trying to gauge like where were the police. And I asked him, I was like, okay, what jurisdiction are you from? He was like, Albemarle County. I was like, do you plan to bring out tear gas? Because that's what I've been hearing for the past like 30 minutes. He's like, no, I don't plan to. I was like, so do you know exactly why you're here? He was like, there's a protest. I'm just doing my job. And I'm like, so do you agree with what's happening? Like, are you happy to be here? Like, do you believe in your job of enforcing and like harassing students in this moment? So I don't know. There's so much to unpack.
Yeah. So the job part though is important, because we see this a lot of times with people in high positions. They have to ride the fence a lot of times. So, so I won't say to President Ryan's credit or saying that I agree, but I understand that when he speaks, at least initially, I guess until he gets all the facts from all sides and all that kind of stuff, he has to be very politically correct because of his position. And I think, there's a level of respect that has to be given to that. But at the end of the day, Max, what you were saying, you brought up a great point, is that usually protesting is because of some, atrocity, some inequity that people feel like, hey, they're not listening to our words, so we have to take, like a different course of action, right? And people protest. So, to that point, Max, like I think that's what makes this so tricky, is that this protest is about something that has such a deep history. And it has so many ties, whether politically, socially, because we were talking about even in the city, how there's, parts of the represented communities in this war that's going on right now, how they went to our city hall and they wanted, the city to agree to that petition and all that kind of stuff, for them to pretty much pick a side, right? To choose a side. So when you look at it like that, it's like we could lose sight of there's a deeper issue and there's a call to action that people are asking. And, and for this, it seems like people are, at the end of the day, asking for peace and not to put political objectives before peace. Right.
I think there's certainly a healthy level of civil disobedience.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like that's part of the country, right? So getting back to that, Zai, too. So you mentioned how there were tents up on grounds in other locations, right? So I think that we need to maybe address that from your perspective of like how do we even approach that, right? Because that falls in line with previous protests and stuff that we've seen around the city, on how people even said that the neo-Nazis or white supremacists or alt-right were handled differently than other groups were handled. So from your perspective, your thoughts on how do we even begin that critical but healthy conversation to try to address it? Right.
Well, I think first, we have to really orient ourselves in the time that we're discussing. So if everyone has been watching the news or scrolling through social media, you've seen how students at Columbia have been handled, arrested, harassed by police, attacked by police for having an encampment. And then NYPD has been criticized by, some folks in Congress, public figures who have said, that was an excessive amount of force for students sitting peacefully and trying to just have their voices heard, which is their right to do so. So I think if we're thinking about that, it's also important. You mentioned President Ryan's kind of like tough position to be in. University presidents have also been criticized by Congress people and by large, institutions about the ways that they've handled this conflict on their campuses. So it's so much to like even Black women, university presidents have been criticized on the ways that they have responded to this conflict. So I think it's so tricky because it's like, how can a university have a perfect response? I don't know. But I do know, again, that what happened yesterday was inappropriate. And so I think that I don't know that students are asking for a perfect response. I think what they're asking for is for the university to call out the fact that in Gaza, all of the universities no longer exist right now. They've been torn down, they've been bombed, they've been, destroyed. And so as university students, we feel like we have a certain level of privilege because here we are, we're going to take our finals, we're going to sit in our classrooms and learn. And on the other side of the world, we have, people who don't have the same right. And I think that that's the main thing that has caused university campuses to really want to call that out, because it's like, how can we sit here and turn our eye to this? In the same way, when there have been other anti-war protests over the years, it's been uncomfortable. Right. It's not popular to say we as the United States don't need to fund this. We don't need to fund this genocide. We don't need to. But it's necessary to say. And I think that at the bottom line, protest is never comfortable. It's never super popular. And so you asked, what kind of decision do they make with themselves before they go out there? I think there is this kind of understanding that people may criticize me for protesting, and I have to be okay with that. I have to be okay with being and holding an unpopular position. And so I think like I commend the students for that. And I wasn't a part of the organizing for this protest. I wasn't really involved in it at all, but I went out yesterday because I wanted to record. I wanted to bear witness. I wanted to see how students were being treated, who was escalating the situation. That's what we keep asking, who escalated it. And from my perspective and from my view of observing the encampment over the past few days and then seeing what happened yesterday, is that the students were not the people who escalated this situation. And that needs to be called out.
Gotcha. Now let me push back a little bit though. Like, I wouldn't even call it devil's advocate. Like, I'm just going to say a different perspective.
Okay.
It's one of those things to where as a Black father of Black boys in particular, we have to have conversations. And of course, Black mothers have the conversation as well, but I'm speaking from my personal perspective. Like, we have to have conversations that a lot of other communities don't, because they are considered, more likely to be profiled, at risk in different environments. So like, I can't help but think about that conversation would be the same that I would have with students. Now, let me preface by saying I agree and I understand that peaceful protesting should be respected. But at the same time, again, if we look at it that there's documentation or that there's rules and that there's warnings, that means we have to conduct ourselves accordingly. And if we don't, then we don't really have a say on how the law enforces itself. If we break the law, quote unquote, that's in place. And I just mentioned that because this is a conversation that I have to have, like with my kids, of like, you're a Black male driving a decent car, you may get pulled over. You need to know what the rules are. You need to know what your rights are, for one, but you also need to know that when someone's in a position of power, there's a certain respect you have to give them. And if you don't, whether they're right or wrong, they will respond to that disrespect that they may perceive. So I just say all that because it's like, we may not like how they responded, but again, where's the onus though to say you also open yourself up to this treatment, because we see the history of this country, which systematically needs to change. But if we know what they're going to do and then we break a rule, how can we then still sort of cry wolf about it?
I actually think it's interesting that you hold that perspective, mainly because you just mentioned driving a car and having these rights and things, but there was a point in time where Black people didn't have rights. And we didn't make it to this point because everybody followed the rules. We didn't make it to this point because everybody was like, oh, I'm going to just respect the slave catchers, which then turned into the policing institution that we know of now. So like,
absolutely.
I love when people say devil's advocates, because I believe that the devil has enough advocates and he'll need them more. But I also believe that like, if we want to hold up the Black power fist, if we want to talk about Stokely Carmichael and we want to talk about all these revolutionaries, let's be clear on what their positionality would be in this current moment. Because they wouldn't tell us that we just gotta be okay with opening ourselves up to whatever. Like, and that's always my frustration, because I'm like, we use these icons. We love to wear the shirts. We love to wear the images, but we don't understand what that actually means. And so I would encourage people to think about the question of what happens when the laws are anti-Black. What happens when these institutions at their core literally exclude us and devour us and don't care about us? Then at what point do we ask ourselves, okay, how do we create new laws? How do we not even create new laws? How do we create new institutions or new platforms that actually serve us? Like we say, by us, for us, by us, but what does that actually mean when the rubber meets the road? Like, and so, we would get into a deep conversation that would last hours about this.
I believe
but I am.
But you get where I'm coming from, though, right?
It's
like I'm not justifying it, and I agree that the processes need to change.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm saying that we know what the response is going to be if we put ourselves in certain positions. That's all I'm saying. So then I feel like that we just have to keep fighting. You don't give up the fight. I'm not saying that by any means, but I'm like, we then can't act surprised when police do what police has always done.
I don't think the students out there are surprised at all. I think that they've seen, like I said, they've seen it on the national level for the past few weeks at other campuses. They've seen how UVA has responded back to anti-racist organizers and activists versus how they responded in 2017 to white supremacists. So I don't think there's any level of shock or surprise. I think that just because you're not surprised, though, doesn't mean that you can't be enraged.
Oh, spot on.
And I think once we start to lose that tendency to be enraged, that's when we're in trouble.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
You know, one of your last responses kind of feeds into a question I have for you. So if we as Black and brown people understand how these higher education institutions are going to protect us or lack thereof, or respond to us or what have you, what our treatment will be by attending those places. Why then do we Black and brown people still choose those places? So why are Black and brown people still choosing the University of Virginia if they know that the University of Virginia doesn't per se care for them and isn't going to be there to protect them in the way that they should?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think that it's almost as if we're starting to get into the HBCU versus PWI conversation. And I will say,
who's the real HU? No,
oh, God. I will say that, well, I know why students who I'm close with who are from this area chose the UVA is because their ancestors built it brick by brick. So they feel like, if my people built it, why can't I go learn there? And I agree with that. And I also say, like, just a couple weeks ago, we were all having a great time, great vibes in the sunshine when Black alums came back to town. And we were like, wow, like, look at really how we've contributed to this university. Like, we have so many notable, like, things that we've done here. And a lot of it has come from student protests too. Like I was talking to a couple Black alums yesterday and they were like, oh, don't worry. Cause back when we were in school, we had the same issues with police harassing us. We were holding space on the lawn. We were doing anti-war efforts. So keep going, keep doing the good fight. And that encouragement means so much because it's like, I'm all about intergenerational dialogue and respecting what has come before us. And they laid the foundation for student organizers now. Like we understand that. I don't think it's a matter of white institutions versus Black institutions because they're all governed by the United States. Like, I think, like, even if you go to an HBCU, there's an issue of respectability and asking Black students, like, look at the protests on HBCU campuses. Like, a lot of HBCUs were founded through the legacy of protest and standing up and talking about these issues. But also some HBCU students have pointed out that over the years, there has been a lot of harassment of those student organizers. And, like they're anti-Black spaces too.
I do understand that. And for me, I honestly wasn't even looking at it as the HBCU versus the PWI, but it's the choice that the student is making as to which institution they will choose to attend.
I followed the money personally. So
well, it's actually interesting you said that because we got a person online that apparently wants some attention, like he lighten it up, and he actually says you go to UVA when you get a free education. I think we know what he's talking about. But it's a lot of comments. It says excessive force is needed when you don't do what you're told to do and you're breaking the law. He says also, well, we also have a young lady joined in and said tense doesn't equate to police using excessive force like they did yesterday.
And I could agree with that.
All right. But back to the gentleman, he also says, why is breaking the law okay? Trespassing is trespassing. Different. I'll go ahead and run through them. We can revisit if you want. Different police chiefs at Seville and UVA may be. That's why the response is different now. Lastly, it looks like harassment is done if you're not breaking the law. Harassment is done if you're not breaking the law. Why don't you guys explain why you should follow rules and laws, especially after days of warnings and being told to leave? But y'all okay with that? Explain why October the 7th was okay and why is it okay to you all to kill Jews? Sir, nobody here ever condone that. And actually, if you look at the purpose of the protests, they're actually to garner peaceful solutions. Right. It's not okay for anybody to be killed, especially when we see these babies, these children's hospitals, these the casualties of war, as it's known as. So that those are atrocities, and I think people are just asking to stand on the side of what's right and what's wrong, not picking based on any religious opinion or anything of that sort. But but that was a lot. I don't know if anything stood out to you.
I mean, I think where students are getting their education for free, let's be clear, we've had so many discussions about affirmative action since the summer. There are brilliant Black and brown students at the University of Virginia that deserve to be in that space. So if we want to get into who's getting in for free and who's getting in for whatever reason, let's talk about the legacy policies. But, no one ever wants to talk about that. But I think that there's so much to unpack there. But what I'm here to talk about is the fact that what I observed, again, watching from the outside, looking in, not really being involved in it because there's been so much going on. I've also had the flu, so I wasn't able to be, present. But observing and seeing from the outside, like it did not look like it was a horrible, it was very peaceful and it was very informative. And even when I was able to drive past or look, I could see students inviting other students in, hey, come talk with us, come have a conversation with us. I've seen videos, I've seen other students who have called me and been like, yeah, I didn't know if I wanted to stop by, but I stopped by and, they gave me some water, some snacks. They talked to me. They told me a little bit about why they were out there. And that is so important. That's what it's all about. This is on a college campus and we have students at table all the time, right? Like they set up tables, they talk about their clubs or organizations, why they feel the way they feel. And so again, what are public universities supposed to do? And even in the email that was sent out by administration, it was like, oh, not only did the tents escalate the situation, it was like a call to action from the group who was organizing it to the community to ask for community support. And I'm like, we have lighting of the lawn and community members come. We have trick-or-treating on the lawn and community members come. So when do we get to decide who's safe and who's not safe from the community to be present at a public university? Like there are just so many things that we could really discuss there. But at the end of the day, like I told you, I was going to emphasize what I saw was peaceful students holding space. And I'm really concerned about, what warrants so much police activity, because the students were extremely outnumbered by the police until they started bringing in state police. And that's when students started to show up in solidarity.
There was a part of me that was a little bit worried for y'all because you also made yourselves soft targets, not saying anything one way or the other as far as being in support or opposition of gathering, but being gathered in that space made you soft targets for some bad actors.
And what about the part of outsiders infiltrating? Because that seems to be, whether it's an excuse or whether it's truth, that comes up every time where people say, well, it wasn't the UVA students or it wasn't this group. It was people that's not even from here. They came to, to infiltrate and start problems. Did you notice any of that yesterday?
I don't even know what that means in this context, mainly because, like I said, like if students are asking community members or legal observers to be present just to see what's going on and to observe and to record or whatever, I don't know that there were outsiders who were leading this. This was a student-led effort, from what I know. And so I'm just not sure about what that exactly means. But I do know that so many community members were there when pepper spray, tear gas, whatever it was, the solution that was burning people's eyes, they were there like helping as medics, like helping students like get what they needed, helping them, get the resources that they needed in those moments. And there were a lot of community members out there who were like, back up, like don't charge at the police, don't. So I feel like the community members who were out there that I did see were literally out there with first aid kits. The professors that I saw out there that I knew pretty well were also out there with the same intention of like, we're just trying to make sure everyone's safe. That was my intention too. I was like, I just want to make sure everyone's safe. I just want to make sure that people know what they're doing. They're not making actions that they're going to regret later, they know what's going to happen and that they're anticipating the worst, unfortunately, when it comes to, so many police being out there. So that was my goal. And just to, again, bear witness, record, see what was happening. And from what I observed and from the footage that I have, I didn't see students being aggressive or like really escalating the situation. So I really have a lot of questions about what happened and what kind of documented things that the police was going off of to even bring in such heavy police presence.
Has the university or I guess the UVA's police department issued a written response after the event kind of culminated in the way that it did? Has any information been released from them as far as how that?
Not that I've seen.
Okay.
I'm not sure if there has been. I just haven't seen it.
Okay.
And the guy was saying this, commenting online. I said a couple more things. Ask Zion about the lawsuit against UVA. Also mentioned saying that he doesn't need attention, he needs facts. What does river to the sea mean? I know what he's referring to. I think y'all do, but nobody here mentioned river to the sea. So, I don't even think we need to address that here. But you know what's coming to my mind though? Like that's one of the classic responses of white supremacy. What we're saying this guy do right now, which is when there's an issue that white supremacy has caused and has ingrained in our institutions, in our system, in our government, when you try to fix it, then it's reverse racism. It's like, then all of a sudden we're victim blaming. And so that's what I see happen so many times when anybody questions the reason for their existence. Is all of a sudden it's like you're teaching me and my kids to hate myself. Nobody's doing that. I'm not sitting here agreeing with anybody that's saying one side should be killing the other. I'm talking about peaceful resolutions, and I stand on the side of anyone who's saying that atrocity should end, genocide should end, and we should try and work for peaceful resolutions. But as long as we have, like tainted mindsets and hate for one another, then there's no way you're going to get peaceful resolution.
Yeah, I also stand on your side of just like, which isn't technically a side. It's just saying that genocide is bad. And if that is so controversial, I'm also concerned about where we are politically, that you can't say that genocide is bad.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That's
I'm
bad.
sitting here with this question. I'm thinking about humor in this, this person. And so, Zai, you had mentioned earlier in the interview that you were just there to make sure that people knew what they were doing. You were there to ensure that people were safe. If this situation turned out the way it did because of the encampment, why did you not advise those participating in it differently? Like, y'all know how this is about to turn out. Now that y'all popped up these tents, put those away. If you want to be here and hold space, we need to put those away so that we don't give them any reason to respond adversely to us.
I think, unfortunately, because it's a collective, I think it's important to recognize that no one student can tell a collective of students what they can't do, right? I think, again, we talked about personal assessment of risk. So if students decide that that's what they want to do, hey, I was out there, I spoke to a student as I was literally getting out of my car, and he was like, I'm coming back. And I was like, you need to be careful. And I need you to tell me what's going on right now so that I can, because I know you and I've known you since you got here and you're younger than me. And I'm just going to tell you, be safe, be careful. Don't poke the bear, just act. And let's be clear too. When people organize protests, when collectives have encampments or, sit-in type of protests, they have an understanding of what they're going to do and how they're going to do it and how they're going to try to de-escalate amongst themselves. So I definitely said to multiple students, hey, is there maybe another way to go about this? But I'm not, on behalf of the university, going to tone police or police my peers. I will just say that these are the things that you should be aware of. And so, yeah, I definitely was I told a couple of people, they were I'm just going to try to run through. I was like, be prepared for what that looks like. That's all, you know? And there were, like I said, there were professors out there who were saying the exact same thing. I'm not going to condemn the students or say oh, my peers did an awful job. But what I will say is that I think that the people who are out there understood what was going on, because when I spoke to certain students, I said, okay, so do y'all know what's going to happen next? And they were like, it looks like the police are going to move in soon. I actually said that on the recording that I put on Instagram. And I was like, okay, so because of this, I'm going to move to the side. Anybody else who does not feel comfortable should also move to the side. So don't think that I wasn't out there, telling them from my own personal experience and my own direct action training, this is what you should be aware of and this is what you should think about. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Zai. And Zai, we are up against the hour, but thank you. I'm pretty sure we covered this pretty well.
We did. Did we miss anything? Is there anything you want to leave listeners with?
I was going to ask that because you are one that I appreciate when it comes to always having action and not just talk. So I'm curious. Is there any ideas yet on how to provide some resources with this?
I think following the UVA encampment Instagram to see how students are asking for support moving forward is great, because it is a student-run collective and group who is doing these actions. So I think listening to the students, but I just want to say that to suggest that students are so misinformed, are so, uneducated around the issues is just ridiculous and it's also ahistorical. We've seen how on college campuses there have always been students who have led on the front lines of the most progressive social and political issues. So to suggest that this is anything new would be ridiculous and again ahistorical. So let's just think about how students have always literally sat in the classroom, been a part of the discussions, read the readings and done their research, and then have come up with ways to make their voices heard. So again, I just ask that, like, to those who are the prayer type, like, definitely pray for my peers, because there are a lot of students who went through some very traumatic experiences yesterday, and we're holding them all in our thoughts. But as you said, action. There has to be thoughts, prayers, and action. And I just will also say that we need to pay attention to what the university is doing, pay attention to what all of these institutions are doing, and how they respond to certain situations and certain student actions differently. And we should call that out. But I just hope that students could continue to remain safe and continue to act within their own risk of what they feel is most comfortable for them. And that we continue to prioritize educating each other within the student body, because that's what college is all about.
Well said. Zyhana, peace and blessings. And thank you as always. And, we'll be in touch.
Thank you.